had late stages adrenal fatigue. The way that kind of works is the adrenaline and cortisol get really depleted, and then your body uses the sex hormones to do the job that adrenaline and cortisol were doing. So that imbalances your hormones and you end up with lots of other health issues. So I had all these symptoms of just being tired all the time, getting sick easily. And I saw what's called an integrative GP over here in Australia. And that's like a proper medical general practitioner, but they have a lens of holistic, naturopathic remedy. So they don't go to medication first. They'll look at your lifestyle and they'll look at other options. So, yeah, they explained that to me, and I realised that I was heading to burnout and I was quite sick and starting to deal with that then. I believe after learning so much more that it's affected things like my endometriosis. It's actually Irene Lyon in the somatic world. She talks about how trauma being held in the body affects so much, including things like PCOS, autoimmune diseases. She's actually seen, and they've been studying it, not here to promote it, but I love the program, and somatic work. By doing somatic work, people have had things like addictions and nightmares stop and all those sorts of things by slowing down and recovering the nervous system. I'm kind of going backwards, but I'll scoot forward shortly into what happened and what caused this in me. But after years of being exhausted and trying to navigate this adrenal fatigue and this burnout, I kind of just kept spiraling. Like I had a husband and a business. He ended up leaving me. That's not really the point of it all, but I ended up running this business by myself. It was kind of big, and it was like a bricks and mortar pole and fitness studio. And around the 6-year mark, I just really had enough. Like I'd had nightmares for pretty much 30 years at that point. The only time in my life where I didn't have nightmares was when I overtrained my body, which ran me into burnout and was part of my demise. And overworking. I just felt like no matter what I tried, I couldn't get this really hard stuff to stop. Actually, at the point that I kind of had a plan to not be here, we'll put it that way. I mentioned it to someone recently who was actually a good friend at the time, and she was like, oh, and I went, that's how serious it was. I didn't actually tell one of my best friends. I just went, you know what? I'm going to shut my business down, deal with my debts so my son doesn't have to. And what I decided, I realized that was quite dark. And I thought, well, if I walk two paths, I walk the path of sorting out all this stuff because it's going to take a while, and walk the path of what does staying alive actually look like? What if I try to get better at the same time? And so that's where I started the work of noticing what was causing my stress. Like I was in addiction at the time. I was drinking quite heavily. I think it's easy for people listening, or when people come across what they might call an alcoholic, to say, oh, just stop drinking and then those problems will go. And it's like, well, actually the drinking's happening because it's actually solving a problem and it's actually keeping me alive. It was like internal family systems work that helped me have compassion for that part of me that was really trying to keep me alive and keep me away from the pain. It was that therapy that helped me understand that and have a lot more self-compassion. You know, as we record this, I've been single for about 6 years, but the other thing was I just couldn't have a healthy relationship. Like they call it reenactment trauma. So I went through childhood SA and a lot of physical violence from a really young age. The first incident that I worked out in therapy was when I was really little and I was 2, and I confirmed it with one of my parents. I just went, hey, this is the only thing that's making sense. Can you please confirm or deny? The parent actually confirmed that they walked in on when that was happening, and I was like, wow, my body actually knew, and I worked it out in therapy all by myself without talking to a parent. But yeah, it was the only thing that made sense with the symptoms I was having somatically. And my memory tells me, like my actual memory, not my body memory, that, yeah, I know that I experienced a lot of stuff around the periphery of child SA. And if you hear that phrase, most people jump to what they think it might be. But what happened to me was a lot of stuff around the edges for a long time, and it was really impacting. One of the things that was really tricky about my life and not being able to use my voice as a grown-up was the coercion that happened in our home. And we would know that now as grooming. Like all I knew was I thought that one of my parents was in my corner. A dad might say, oh, you know your mum's like this, or you know your mum's like that. And that's effectively parental alienation, which is grooming. So the person who's the perpetrator is trying to get the kid in their corner by being on their side when there's a conflict in the home or undermining the other parent. and years of that. And then when you piece it together in therapy and all those kinds of things, you go, oh, wow, I thought I was actually loved, but actually I was being manipulated the whole time, which makes one doubt one's own mind as they are trying to have relationships. So the reason I'm talking about this is that reenactment trauma, it just kept happening. Like I'd have several years break between relationships and have more therapy and then go back into yet another unhealthy relationship. And so when I was at that really dark point, I was like, well, I can't have a relationship. I'm guarded in my friendships. I'm having nightmares and, just couldn't get on top of it. The other thing too, I'm one of 3 siblings and our experiences of our childhood were really different. And that was actually part of the manipulation strategy to put a wedge between people. So what happened is like one sibling would claim nothing ever happened to me, whereas I obviously had something happen from what I explained. And then another sister, she had so much happen that when she eventually charged him, he was the first person in our state done with what's called persistent child SA. And so like even for me who had been through what I'd been through, I was like, wow, like did he really do that? Like, because that's not what happened to me. And that itself is actually a tactic to drive a wedge between people. And it took years for us as siblings to get on the same team, which is really isolating, as you can imagine. So that setup sent me into my first reenactment trauma, which is kind of a phrase I've learned recently, but the pattern replaying. And it was in a really, really intense domestic violence relationship where I was nearly killed a number of times and I was held hostage and all kinds of really, really hard things happened. And I left at the age of 18 and managed to charge him. But at that time, the way the laws were, he didn't get very much time at all. My memory is he got a $250 fine. And it's something that we're fighting for in Australia at the moment is that character shouldn't be a part of someone's sentencing. What happens is you go through a court case and then when they get sentenced, people can testify to the person's good character and they go, oh, well, they're actually kind of a good person even though they tried to kill somebody, so we'll give them less of a sentence. And it's like, how does that work? So people are fighting really hard to have that fixed. So that was the first big one, and then over time there was another one and a break and another one and a break, and I progressively got sicker. But essentially my therapy journey started when I was in my early 20s. Like I recognised young that I needed help. I was a young mum. I did the typical, I'm sure many of us do it, I'm not going to be like my parents in this way or that way or whatever. And then I was realising I was yelling. I was yelling at a small child, or I felt this anger. I remember one day going and smashing a plate in the backyard. Like I just had this rage that was so high. It wasn't targeted at my child. Like I didn't hurt my child, but like I definitely just didn't know how to contain myself and realise that I was actually being like my parents. So a few years after I started therapy in my 20s, I had a general practitioner decide all on his own that I had bipolar. And he popped me on lithium. I kept going back to him saying that my symptoms were still there. I was still heightened. I was still scared. I was still having nightmares. So he kept increasing my lithium to the point that I went to 2 concerts in the space of a short amount of time. One was Pearl Jam and one was Tori Amos, 2 of my favourites. And I didn't even feel excited at the concert. And I was like, this is weird. Like, it's Pearl Jam. Why am I not screaming? And I was like, this is affecting me really badly, and clearly it's not working. Like I'm having all the bad feelings still, like nightmares and the heightened symptoms of being scared, but I can't enjoy a concert. And I'm not sure of the timing, but I've been mismedicated a few times. I was also put on at one point an antipsychotic for my nightmares, and I tried things repeatedly over the years for my nightmares, so they put me on an antipsychotic. And if you know anything about these kind of medications, they have a bunch of other side effects. So like I put weight on really, really quickly. I swear to God, I had anxiety and depression and antipsychotics all at the same time, and nothing was working. Ultimately, going back to the bipolar misdiagnosis, I actually had 2 friends in different states of Australia studying at the same time, and they both came to me separately within the space of a few weeks and said, we think that you've got PTSD. And then when I went back to my GP and said that, and he said, oh, why is that? And I explained it, and he was like, oh, we need to get you off the lithium, which was a horrible experience. it was like there was a dragon inside of me trying to get out, and I had to navigate working. And it taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life, though, was that you can't trust your thoughts. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. Just because you have a feeling doesn't mean you need to follow it. And because I had this like dragon in me trying to get out, I was like, I need to wait 48 hours before I act on anything, because I could burn my life up while I'm withdrawing off this horrible medication and working at the same time. And so I actually learned the art of pausing while I had this dragon inside of me. So I guess my message around sharing this is that ultimately none of that worked. None of it. And I would agree, like I had a friend who was a GP, well, she was like a student at my studio. And she said, sometimes we do that to keep people alive. Like we have to give you something to keep you alive. And I'm like, okay, if that's the case, keep me alive, but get me help. Get someone to a psychiatrist, get someone to a psychologist, get the right assessment. Don't just assume to give someone lithium, I spent so many years in traditional talk therapy, and that's trying to teach you skills. So they're trying to teach you cognitive behavioral therapy, and you're supposed to analyze your thinking. And if you get triggered, you're supposed to stop and pull a card out of your purse and look at it. And it wasn't until years later that I learned, well, when I'm triggered, my brain doesn't work. So no, and I knew when the psychologist said to me to take a card out of my purse, I was like, that's not going to happen. But I didn't know why. Like I didn't know that when you get triggered, you literally just can't use your normal thinking brain. So if you actually try to head to therapy and you haven't settled your nervous system and you haven't built capacity in your body to hold hard things, you're not going to be able to take on the lessons of therapy. If someone does take you to your trauma too quick, you might not be able to hold that when you get home afterwards. And what that leads to is a lot of shame, like you're there trying to learn these skills and integrate them into your life, but you actually physically can't. And I remember years later, like I'd spent all this time with one psychologist learning things like putting my hand up in a stop sign and saying a certain phrase to hold a boundary, and I just could never do it. And it wasn't until I'd settled my nervous system more and had EMDR on certain things that one day my hand just came up and did the thing that I practiced years ago with the psychologist. And I was like, wait, what? That's in my brain somewhere? I had no idea. But it took settling my nervous system enough so that I had space. And honestly, like a lot of people have heard the quote and no one really seems to know who it's attributed to anymore, but I had it saved as a phone screensaver for ages. And it was the one by apparently Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, there is our freedom. And I was like, I want to find that space. And I realized how hard it was to find that space. Like just to find it to begin with, let alone to nurture it and grow it and find it in the middle of a conflict, or take that pause so that you can choose to respond instead of react. It took so long. And I was just like, wow, this is actually like my life's work. And it felt like my life's work to be able to bring that to other people, like the art of finding that space. And now we might call it the window of tolerance, or like capacity building, widen our window of tolerance so that we can handle things, so that we can then step into feeling and releasing feeling and know how to come back to it. Like it's such a fine practice, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication to find it. So where to from here with my business shutting down? Like I actually had a proper meltdown. Like I had 6 years in business, working 50 to 60 hours a week. I actually ended up homeless twice. Like I shut everything down. I just went, I can't do it. I went and tried to get a job, and the person I worked with was really narcissistic. And I just went, I can't take any more abuse from anybody. And I quit the job, ended the lease at my house, and just went, I'm just going to go be a housemate somewhere. Like I can't handle the world. But it was actually the first step of me really self-caring. Like I feel like it's a bit dramatic, but it was actually the first step of building trust with my parts. So part of that ending reenactment trauma and replaying patterns is learning to listen to your gut instinct and following it and using your voice. Dr. Gabor Mate was talking about that recently. As babies, we don't silence ourselves if we want to eat or drink. We cry. We automatically use our voice. And then one of the earliest things we do, and he checked it with some people from other countries, the next phase a kid goes through is saying no all the time, even if they want the drink. No, 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 no. We grow up crying for our food and using our gut instinct, and we grow up using our voice saying no, like when we're first made, and then it gets squished out of us. And it's like part of our work is to find that gut instinct again and to find that voice again. So me quitting my job and ending up homeless was actually the first part of me doing that. I just went, no one else is hurting me anymore. I'm done. I don't care what it looks like. I'm going to get back on my feet. And I feel like it gave me a big driver as well to get well. It was like a rebellion. And so now I know that I trust myself more because I listen to myself more and I use my voice more. And sometimes it does have costs in that, people around me aren't used to it. Like I'm heading toward my late 40s. People would know me as speaking up about things, but usually about other people, not myself. So the last few years I've been learning to speak up for myself. And I think someone put it really well to me, probably my psychologist. She said I need to treat myself like I've just taken my 11-year-old self out of the fire and I have to be really kind to her. And I feel like that just gave me that lens of how to reparent myself and take that self-care that I need to be able to grow and heal more. I feel settled, and not being here is not on my to-do list anymore. So I feel like that's probably a great way to wrap up. Thank you